There we go, perfect.
Do you want me to start from the beginning?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry to everyone who's heard it. So hi, I'm Laura. I'm joined with my colleague Eamon to deliver this exercise after stroke webinar to you all. A little bit of background about us. Eamon and I both work for the Stroke Association, and we're the UK's leading stroke charity dedicated to conquering stroke, and we do that in various different ways. We're here today because Swim England have kindly approached us and asked us to deliver this webinar in order to educate you all a bit more about stroke and physical activity. Eamon and I are both delivering physical activity projects within the charity, and we're actually based within the North West, but the charity itself covers the whole of the UK. We hope that this session is useful and informative for you all within your roles. So Bethan, as she said before, she's on hand for any technical issues, and she did say before that we would be giving you the floor to ask any questions throughout the session. If you've got any questions as we go along, if you want to type them into the box, Eamon, whilst I speak, Eamon is going to compile them. But then when we'll kind of save the questions to a specific point, answer them then, and if anyone wants to speak at that point and ask any questions over the microphone, that'd be great. So we're going to split the webinar into two. So I'm going to present the first part, and then Eamon's going to present the second part, just so that you don't get too bored of the same voice, really. So just to outline some of the aims of today's webinar, and we hope that by the end of the session, you have a bit of an idea about what stroke is and some of the effects of stroke. You have some idea about the work of our charity and the support that we are able to provide to stroke survivors. You're aware of some of our work in helping stroke survivors become more active and some of the benefits of physical activity. And as individuals and leisure providers, you understand how you can become more stroke friendly and make your activities and centres more accessible for those affected by stroke. So hopefully that sounds interesting to everyone. So there are 1.2 million stroke survivors in the UK, and that's around 2% of the entire population. Stroke can actually happen to anyone. Many people think of stroke as something that only happens to older people, but a stroke can happen to anyone at any time, regardless of the age, gender, race or social status. It could happen to a father, a baby daughter, a grandparent. And while strokes are more common in older people, people are having strokes earlier in their lives, and around 1 in 4 strokes happen to people of working age. So that's a huge amount of people. Babies, children and young people have strokes too, and there are over 400 childhood strokes a year in the UK. So overall, there are more than 100,000 strokes in the UK each year, so that accounts to about 1 stroke every 5 minutes. Stroke can have a sudden and massive impact on your life. It can rob you of your speech and your ability to walk, but it can also affect things like your vision, memory, concentration and your emotions, and we'll talk more about the effects of stroke shortly. Stroke actually causes a greater range of disabilities than any other condition. In England, Wales and Northern Ireland, almost 2/3 of stroke survivors leave hospital with a disability following their stroke. This can have a huge impact on people's independence, their confidence, their emotional well-being, and it can have a massive knock-on effect to work and family life as well. Stroke care has improved, and now if you have a stroke, you are more likely to survive compared to 20 years ago. But sadly, it's still the 4th biggest killer in England and Wales. Each year, stroke kills more men than prostate cancer, and it kills twice as many women as breast cancer. As a charity, we're here to help. Despite the huge scale of the problem, stroke remains significantly underfunded and misunderstood as well. So that's one of the reasons why we like to do things like this, to raise awareness about what stroke is, so more people know about stroke and know what we do as a charity and know what you can do to help stroke survivors. We're the only charity working across the UK dedicated to stroke, and we do things through support services, we fund research, and we campaign for better stroke care. We want to change the way people think about stroke and also raise awareness of stroke prevention, because if we can stop strokes happening in the first place, that would be great. So hopefully after today, you'll have learned a bit more about stroke, a bit more about the Stroke Association and what you can do within your roles. Some of you might already know what a stroke is, but for those that don't, a stroke is a brain attack, and it happens when the blood supply to part of your brain is cut off. Without blood, your brain cells can be damaged or begin to die. And there are two main types of stroke. So most strokes, around 85%, are caused by a blockage, such as a blood clot, which cuts off the blood supply to the brain, and this is known as an ischemic stroke. But strokes can also happen because of a bleed caused by a burst blood vessel within or on the surface of the brain, and this is known as a hemorrhagic stroke. So hemorrhagic strokes, you can kind of think of it as the brain kind of drowning in the amount of excess blood there. Hemorrhagic strokes, so strokes caused by bleeds, are not as common as ischemic strokes that are caused by a blockage, but they can often be much more serious and are sometimes often associated with a higher risk of dying within the first 3 months and beyond. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour to what a stroke actually is. Some people also experience mini-strokes, and these are known as transient ischemic attacks, or TIA for short. Basically, a TIA, or a mini-stroke, is the exact same thing as a stroke, except the symptoms only last for a short amount of time, so the symptoms are not lasting any longer than 24 hours. So a TIA happens when a blood vessel in the brain gets blocked temporarily, but then it clears by itself. People often mistake the symptoms of a TIA as a funny turn, and although it might not last long, it's still really serious. It can be a major warning sign that there's a problem and that you're at risk of having a stroke. So more than 1 in 12 people will have a stroke within a week of having a TIA, and about half of all strokes after a TIA occur in the first 24 hours. So don't ignore it and get it treated urgently. A little bit about recognising the signs of stroke. So when you have a stroke, every second counts. And recognising the signs and calling 999 for an ambulance is crucial, because the quicker that a person arrives at a specialist stroke unit, the quicker they will receive appropriate treatment. To help more people recognise the signs and symptoms of stroke, we helped fund the development and spread awareness of the FAST test, which I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of. The FAST test is a simple way of helping you to identify the 3 most common signs of stroke. So F is for face. Look at the person's face and ask them to smile. Has the face fallen on one side? Arms. Ask the person to raise both of their arms and keep them there. Are they unable to raise one arm? S is for speech. Ask the person to tell you the name or say hello, and listen to see if you think their speech is slurred. And the T is for time. Time to call 999 if you spot any of the signs. If you recognise the signs in yourself or someone else, always call 999. And we encourage everyone to learn the FAST test and share it with their friends and family, as it really could help save a life. There are many effects of stroke, and I'm going to talk about some of these now. Your brain controls everything you do, so everything you think and feel, your personality, your sense of humour, your behaviour and your opinions. The effects of a stroke depend on two things. So A, where the stroke is in your brain, and B, how much the stroke has damaged your brain. So thinking about some of the effects, a stroke could affect your memory and thinking. So this is very common after a stroke, and most people will have some difficulties. Your vision. About 60% of stroke survivors have visual problems immediately after the stroke. 1/3 of stroke survivors experience problems with communication following a stroke. Swallowing, around half of stroke survivors have problems with this. Approximately 80% of stroke survivors experience problems with movement. Incontinence can be a massive problem, with around half of stroke survivors experience problems with bladder control, especially in the very early stages. And around half of stroke survivors have impaired sensation, which might cause some numbness. So they're all kind of effects of a stroke which people can see or can know about much more easily, but there are also hidden effects of stroke which often people don't realise. So this can be really frustrating for stroke survivors, as to look at, they might sometimes appear okay. So we want to educate people on these effects of a stroke as well as the ones that you can see. Hidden effects can happen to people who don't have any other health problems or disabilities after a stroke. So they can still affect many aspects of a stroke survivor's daily life. So if someone looks okay after a stroke, we shouldn't be presuming that just because they don't have any physical disabilities, for example, they're not suffering from some of the hidden effects. So over half of stroke survivors report fatigue following the stroke, and emotionalism affects about 1 in 5 stroke survivors in the first 6 months after a stroke. Approximately 50% of stroke survivors suffer depression in the first year, and over half of stroke survivors experience symptoms of anxiety at some point in the 10 years following their stroke. Behavioural changes are common. People can change their habits, so often people might start eating food that they've never liked before, suddenly they like it. Or it could be that people could become, say, really irritable, or say and do things completely different to what they did before their stroke. So the effects of stroke need to be considered as a whole, and within your roles it's really good to have an understanding of these and how some of these effects might impact someone's ability to partake in exercise and swimming. Just going to talk a little bit about communication problems after a stroke. So when we communicate, our brain has to complete a series of tasks, and different parts of our brain is responsible for each of these. If one of these parts is damaged, it can cause problems with communication. And in the UK, there are more than 350,000 people with aphasia. So this is a communication disability, and it can affect people's ability to speak, read, write, use numbers and understand things. But it's really important to understand that aphasia doesn't impact someone's intelligence. It's very common after a stroke, and it affects about 1/3 of stroke survivors. With the help and support of people like speech and language therapists, and by using tools and support, stroke survivors can often learn to communicate again, but they might still be left with some kind of impairment. And in customer-facing roles like yours, having that understanding of aphasia and some of the things you can do to support someone's communication can really make the difference, and make a stroke survivor feel like you understand and that you're trying to understand them. On our website, we have some communication tools which could be useful if you're helping, if you're meeting stroke survivors, or if, say, I don't know, if there's anyone on the call who works on the reception or anything like that, you could possibly get some of these tools. So if someone comes to the desk, you can at least try and communicate a message across to them, or they can communicate a message to you. As we talked about before, about 60% of stroke survivors have visual problems after the stroke. A stroke can affect your vision in different ways, including double vision, being very sensitive to light, or losing part of the visual field. Visual problems can make daily activities really difficult, from getting around in the home, getting out, to reading, shopping, watching TV. It can be really tough. 80% of stroke survivors will experience problems with movement. Many have weakness or stiffness in the muscles or lose control of them altogether. It's really common for a whole side of a stroke survivor's body to be weak after a stroke. So if a stroke affects the left side of the brain, for example, then the right side of the body might have a weakness. It might be the whole side, so the arm and the leg, or it could just be that they have weakness in one, so it might just be in one arm or one leg. Muscle weakness affects how well stroke survivors can move the body, but it can also affect balance and make moving around really difficult. With good support, many stroke survivors can and do make a good recovery. Our charity is about helping stroke survivors to rebuild their lives after stroke. So with our services, we provide emotional, practical and peer support to stroke survivors and the families as well. We provide things like grants, and we also have stroke groups where people can come together and share their experience and get that really important peer support. We also offer information and advice through our telephone helpline, and we've got an online recovery tool called My Stroke Guide as well. If you'd like to know any more information about any of our services or anything that we do as a charity, please do feel free to contact me. My details are at the end of the presentation, or you can visit our website, which is stroke.org.uk. So as I mentioned before, we provide practical and emotional support. We believe that it's essential that all stroke survivors get the care and treatment that they deserve, no matter where that they live. So we also actively campaign for better stroke care. We work with politicians to ensure stroke remains high on the political agenda and gets the attention it needs. We listen and work with people affected by stroke, so stroke survivors are at the heart of everything we do. And speaking to stroke survivors, we can make sure that we can drive improvements in stroke care. We know that with the right support, it's possible to adapt to a new life after stroke. So we fund research, and that's the driving force behind improvements in stroke treatment and support. So as a charity, we're currently doing a lot of work to get more stroke survivors active. Eamon is working as part of the Moving Forwards After Stroke Exercise Rehabilitation Programme, and he will talk more about this shortly. We've also got a successful partnership with Golf England, and this is helping stroke survivors get into golf. It's led to us setting up golf groups in areas across the Northwest, but also across the UK generally, but because we cover in the Northwest, were involved in projects in Macclesfield, Blackburn, Warrington, on the South Coast, Liverpool, and many more as well. I'm currently delivering a project called Active Lives After Stroke in central Lancashire, and this is a 2-year Sport England funded project looking at how we can support stroke survivors to become active and stay active through attending peer support groups. We all know how important being active is, but we also know that it can be daunting getting active after a stroke. So the project I'm working on is designed to help stroke survivors get active at their own pace with other stroke survivors and see how that can help with sustainability on a personal level. We have over 250 voluntary-led groups across the UK, and these are peer support groups run by volunteers offering support to those affected by stroke. Many of these groups are currently providing their members with opportunities to move around more. As part of my role, I support groups such as these, and in the North West alone, we've got voluntary-led groups which are offering fishing, walking football, golf, disability darts, bowls and chair-based exercise. We've also got allotment groups, so getting people out in that fresh air, doing physical activity, which is brilliant. New for this year is part of our fundraising month, Make May Purple. We're actually putting on some sports days for members of our stroke groups to come together and take part competing against one another. So we really are putting physical activity at the top of our agenda locally and encouraging people to get more active. There are many barriers for stroke survivors to partake in physical activity, and we know that there's a huge link between inactivity and disability. So 1 in 5 people in England have a long-standing disability or illness. We know, as we said before, that stroke is a leading cause of adult disability. And through Sport England research, we also know that disabled people are nearly twice as likely to be inactive compared to non-disabled people. We know that there are numerous benefits of physical activity after a stroke, and this is why we are really encouraging physical activity and people to start doing more exercise. So a researcher called Billinger et al. 2014 found that physical activity and exercise following a stroke can improve an individual's cardiovascular fitness, their walking ability and their arm strength. But they also found that physical activity can help mood, cognitive function, memory and quality of life after stroke in general. So really, really powerful. Okay, so we're going to have a short stop for any questions before I hand over to Eamon, who's going to talk more about exercise. So are there any questions from anyone so far? So we can't see any in the chat box so far, but we'll give people a minute in case anyone wants to, or if anyone wants to unmute the mic, feel free. Okay, no questions from anyone? Question from Ben. Thank you, Ben. What tools are available for people, for aphasia sufferers? So there's a lot of tools available for people who've got aphasia. We've got some on our website, and we're going to share the slides after the session. So I can also share the link to the website with the section about aphasia and communication tools. There's things like communication ramps, so you can use picture-based things which people can point to. One of the best tools in general is having a piece of paper and a pen. Some stroke survivors won't be able to write, but you could use the piece of paper to kind of keep track of the conversation with like just keywords, just to kind of set apart each topic. Time is the best thing to give stroke survivors with aphasia. We've got a communication chain. So the chain is made up of different steps, and we would say that you need to wait a minute from asking a question or speaking to someone before you speak again. That's because it can take that long to get to the end of the chain. If you interrupt someone at a point in the chain, it means that they might have to go right to the back of the beginning because they've kind of lost the train of thought. So time, just be patient. It can be really uncomfortable waiting for that long, but just allow them to have time. And as I said before, I will share the link to our website with the section for communication tools. So I hope that's helpful and answers your question. Eamon, do you have anything to add with that?
No, only that we have communication support groups that are run centrally by our stroke support teams in localities. So anybody that suffers from aphasia in, for example, say Tameside, will be invited along to Tameside Communication Group, which will meet every week and support participants with their communication using the variety of tools that Laura's just mentioned.
Excellent. So I can see someone has asked if the PowerPoint will be available. Yes, as Bethan said, the PowerPoint will be sent out by email afterwards. Any more questions from anyone? No? I'll hand over to Eamon then. Thank you.
Hello everyone, introduce myself, Eamon Green. I'm the Moving Forward After Stroke Coordinator for Greater Manchester. I'm based in Salford, but I deliver communication deliver Moving Forward in Stockport, Rochdale and Oldham. I'll talk more about that though as we go along. So what I'm going to cover in this part of the webinar is all about exercise, and in particular I'm going to break it down into different segments. So I'm going to look at, first of all, how a stroke can affect mobility, and Laura's already touched upon that. Considerations when talking to stroke survivors about exercise, why there are low levels of exercise in stroke survivors and what prevents people doing some exercise. And finally, I'll talk about the Moving Forward programme and what we're doing with that to support people. So on the slide there, you'll see that I've broken down the main factors why stroke affects mobility, and that's weakness, coordination problems, changes in the muscles following the stroke, balance problems, and fatigue. Laura's already touched upon some of these, but what I'm going to do is to go through each of those in a bit more detail. So first of all, weakness. The foot and leg of a stroke survivor may be paralysed completely, or they may just be weak. As Laura said before, the stroke can have different effects on people physically, and the technical terms, if someone's got paralysis on one side, that's known as hemiplegia, and physiotherapists will often talk about that, and a weakness on one side is hemiparesis. So weakness is a very common issue in mobility following stroke. Coordination problems. People have difficulty following a stroke using their arms and legs. They often feel slow and clumsy, and they have to concentrate very carefully about any activity or movement that they do. Difficulty planning leg movements, there's a technical term for that called apraxia. And when I run the Moving Forward After Stroke programme, there's a lot of issues with people having problems with the coordination and trying to do separate or different exercises. Next on the list is changes in people's muscles. Physiotherapists will talk in technical terms about high tone and low tone. High tone is when the muscles are stiff and tight, also known as spasticity, and low tone is when muscles feel floppy or loose. Spasticity is a condition in which muscles are continuously contracted, and that contraction causes the stiffness and the tightness. That can interfere with individuals' movements, their speed, or their gait when walking in a particular line. Physiotherapists are very useful in that situation, and a lot of stroke survivors who have physiotherapy complain of spasticity, and physiotherapy helps sort of loosen some of that tightness. Similarly, they can receive injections to do that, which will have a sort of short-term effect, but it's another way of actually treating the changes in the muscles. The next one is balance problems, and Laura again mentioned that a little bit earlier. First of all, the balance can be affected by the vision. The vision where people can't see necessarily 360 degrees and they're unaware of their spatial awareness around them. They might think they're standing straight when in fact they're kind of leaning to one side and vice versa. Vertigo is a very common result of having had a stroke. A lot of stroke patients complain of vertigo when they've no control of what's going on around them and they feel as though the room is spinning. Because of the balance problems, this causes a lack of confidence when walking or moving around. And it's therefore, when we have the exercise programs that we deliver for stroke survivors, if someone does complain of balance problems, we have to pay particular attention and watch them carefully when they're doing the exercises for fear they might fall over. We obviously ask them if they do feel a bit unsteady on the feet or feel as though they're going to fall to let us know, and we'll take precautions as soon as we possibly can. Okay, and the final one on the slide was fatigue, on the initial slide, where people feel really fatigued after having a stroke, and even walking a short distance can wear them out. It doesn't necessarily always improve either, and one study that was carried out showed that even people, 50% of people 12 months after having had a stroke still felt fatigue was one of the key areas where they were struggling. Stroke survivors often have to sleep during the day, as well as, you know, the usual 7 or 8 hours at night. But if you ask a stroke survivor what their main issue is following the stroke, I bet most of them will say fatigue is the biggest problem. So that was the first element we wanted to look at, which was just covering how stroke can affect mobility. What I'm going to move on to now is the considerations to take when talking to stroke survivors about exercise, bearing all of that previous information in mind. I think the language has to be right. We've got to be careful that we don't come across as being patronising, and have to accept that there's going to be an element of fear. A lot of stroke survivors were very active prior to the stroke, and many of them were regular participants in sports, whether it's playing golf or going for a run, going to the gym, members of swimming clubs, whatever it might be. And it's a huge step for them to go back to exercise following a stroke. So it's always worthwhile taking into account that anyone you speak to is going to be scared and have some trepidation. We also highlight that it's moderate activity that we're asking people to do. We're not asking them to do anything like they used to do. We're asking them to do something that's enjoyable. And one way of doing that is to exercise with others and perhaps join a group. The NHS guidelines, I think, say 150 minutes a week of moderate activity. You know, where your heart races a little bit, you feel slightly out of breath, and we do encourage that, but we don't necessarily talk about it, you know, bang on about it. It's to get people to start doing some exercise again following the stroke. it's good to ask people if they have a goal as well at the outset, even a small goal. It doesn't matter what it is. If we can go back to the Moving Forward programme, examples of goals that people have are to join friends for a coffee in the morning, to be able to walk to the shops to get a paper without fear of falling, and some have larger goals, but for example, they want to get back to playing golf or whatever it is. But always encourage people to set a small goal, so that sense of achievement when they've met that goal is huge and beneficial to them. So I think Laura mentioned this earlier on about explaining the benefits of physical activity, and if we ask what the main factors people want following or doing physical activity following a stroke, is they want to prevent having another one. And if we say to people that physical activity can do that, then all the better. It wasn't in a report, this actually, I can't remember who did it, but they did find that in stroke survivors, aerobic exercise was found to promote cognitive recovery. So there is actual evidence out there. So once a person has been discharged from hospital following a stroke, they will have a programme of rehabilitation set out for them. And this is usually with a physiotherapist from the hospital, where they'll have a 6-week programme of rehab, where the physio will work with them either in the hospital or mainly when they get back home. And this is to set goals and develop a full recovery programme for them. Unfortunately, in the majority of cases, 6 weeks is nowhere near enough, and people feel left alone, and either, if they've got the money, they'll pay for a private physiotherapy, but if not, they can often feel a bit abandoned, which hopefully is where the programme that we are piloting, the Moving Forward programme, can come in to assist. Following stroke, even basic things like rolling over in bed, moving from a sitting position to a standing position, moving from a bed to the chair or the toilet, or even walking, become very difficult things to do. So the physiotherapy will often start at the very base level in a person's rehab. Benefits of exercise, just touching on this again. It benefits exercise in stroke survivors will improve the strength, coordination, balance, sensation or fitness. And the more often they do that, the better. So repetition is the key to improvement. And moving and doing exercises can help to reduce muscle stiffness and pain. So the message for that slide is regular exercise. So studies that were carried out, this study I have to say was in the States, but this was a study that they did of stroke survivors and asking them what their 3 main goals were by doing exercise following a stroke. And those are there on the slide. To regain some pre-stroke levels of activity, to prevent having another stroke and a cardiovascular event, and to improve cardiovascular fitness. So those were the 3 headlines that were done from a particular study of stroke survivors. Next, I want to talk about why there are such low levels of exercise among stroke survivors, and they are there on the slide. Mobility impairments, cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairments, depression, pain, social isolation, lack of confidence, and no sense of control. Those are what we'll find often in studies that are carried out as to why there are low levels of exercise. What they have told me as an individual running the Moving Forward programme are the following. They have a lack of motivation, don't have the energy to do exercise, they're scared of falling and injuring themselves, they're scared of having another stroke, they're unsure of the benefits and what their own expectations are and how high they should set the bar in terms of what they can do. There's a lack of self-belief, the general perception of the stroke impairment and what that is restricting them in doing. And some people, although some, yes, will have done some exercise, often people have had a very sort of sedentary lifestyle and done little or nothing since the earlier years. So a few more. The fear of losing balance, I've already said. Fear of falling and looking a bit silly, and not being able to complete the exercises that they're given, not understanding what they are, and again, looking and feeling a little bit awkward in a particular environment. So, what are people's expectations or motivations to do the exercise? There they are on the slide. Improve mobility and improve balance. When people were asked what are the two main things they expect in terms of support from exercise professionals when working with stroke survivors, are there the community-led exercise programme, which other than our Moving Forward programme doesn't really exist in Greater Manchester, but they want the staff to provide clear instructions, ensuring that safety and comfort and motivation at all times. So that is the ask, if you like, from a stroke survivor of an exercise professional. So I'll talk a little bit now about the Moving Forward programme. This is a pilot programme, so in other words, we're testing it out, and it's a 12-week programme of exercise and lifestyle advice for stroke survivors. Nationally, we're piloted in Greater Manchester, Gateshead, Brighton, Folkestone and Scotland. In fact, it was in Scotland that this programme first took shape following a report at Stirling University, and they trialled it in Scotland. So it's a commitment of 2 hours a week. We get referrals from physiotherapists, from GPs, and majority of them come from our stroke teams that we have in all the localities in Greater Manchester. The only area we don't have a presence is Bury, so we don't get any referrals from that particular area. But the purpose of the programme is to help improve physical fitness of a stroke survivor, including strength, flexibility and endurance, and to support positive lifestyle changes. So it's a partnership with ourselves, Later Life Training, and Later Life are the only accredited trainer to deliver this course for us. It's a level 4 PT qualification, and as I say, they're the only accredited ones, and there are a number of personal trainers in the Northwest that have got that qualification. We also work with the local authorities and local leisure centres to use their facilities to run the particular scheme or programme. So, as I say, we're trialling it. We've had a evaluation done independently in the last couple of months, because the programme isn't funded by commissioning bodies and the CCG. It's funded centrally by the Stroke Association itself. So it's a pilot programme. We're in year 2 now. We've got funding for another year. So hopefully this time next year we'll be in a position where we can roll the programme out in more areas in Greater Manchester. But going back to the actual programme itself, stroke survivors, once they have been referred into the programme, we'll invite them to be assessed the week before the programme starts by a physiotherapist, a neurophysiotherapist. And the eligibility criteria for anyone who wanted to take part was that they're able to sit in any seat independently, They're able to mobilise more than 5 metres with or without a walking aid. Patients with aphasia must have a communication strategy. That's a bit of a grey area because I've had participants with aphasia on the programme who, yes, they have been able to necessarily contribute verbally, but physically and by using gesture and sign, they've obviously thoroughly enjoyed the programme itself. We ask, or we expect a resting heart rate of 100 beats per minute, or maximum should I say, and the blood pressure maximum is 180/100. So if somebody comes along, meets that criteria, then we will assess them. So it's a 12-week exercise program. We have a ceiling of participants on each program, and that's a maximum of 8. And the reason there's only 8 is because there's an exercise instructor delivering the exercise element, and he or she is asking a lot for them to have responsibility for more than 8 people if some people need more attention than others. So 8 is the ceiling at the moment on the program. The first hour is with me, and that's we call that an education session, where each week we look at a different subject. For example, one week we'll look at safe exercises at home. Another week we'll look at how people might start to reduce bad habits, whether that's too much sugar or too much salt. We look at meal planning. We look at people's well-being, where we actually drill down to the emotions, the emotional impact of the stroke. And that's usually quite a good session that we hold quite early in the 12-week program. We also look at nutrition and dietary advice, and at the end of the 12 weeks we do a little quiz to see who's picked up what. The second hour is the actual exercise, and I'll talk a bit more about what we do shortly. But one of the main benefits that we found of the program is that the peer support and the motivational support that people have with each other is one of the main key factors and key successes of the program. These will be 8 people in a setting they've probably unlikely to have met each other before, and in some cases it's the first opportunity that they've had to meet and talk to other people outside of their network of family and friends, and they can talk more openly. Some people will say that their family, although they're being supportive of anything, are sort of treating them with kid gloves and are scared of upsetting them and saying or doing the wrong things. But in a group setting like this, anything goes, and people will often, let off steam and feel comfortable doing so with other people in a similar situation. So that's one of the key selling points of this particular program. The exercise that we do, it's quite low level because obviously people have had a stroke, and it's called the starter program that Later Life run. So the actual session itself consists of a warm-up and some stretching. The circuits, and we tend to use leisure centres, but we can use community centres. It works well in either. But the circuits has to include a sit to stand exercise, wall press, ball raise and lower, stationary bike, 10-metre walk, and a balance exercise. Generally finish off doing some work with the resistance bands, a warm down, and a final stretch. The actual sessions themselves, there's no way of knowing until we get the referrals what the different age ranges are going to be. But it can be a 25, 30-year-old individual in the same exercise session as someone who's 75 or 80. So that obviously has implications with the exercise instructor, and it can, on occasion, be quite difficult for the younger individual to actually be in that session because they feel kind of, why has this happened to me? I'm not this gentleman's age, doesn't seem right. So at some points we are hoping to be able to be in a position where we can deliver a moving forward program for younger stroke survivors. But at the moment it's a catch-all, and there are different people of different ages within the particular an individual program. So at the end of the 12 weeks, that's not it. We don't say thank you, off you go. We sit down with each person individually and we try and identify something that they can continue to do that suits their needs and their accessibility. For example, Rochdale will offer a reduced rate membership at leisure centres at Rochdale, Haywood and Biddleton. And we also signpost people to appropriate local groups, whether that's walking. We've got swimming on there, that's in our wish list. Walking groups are quite popular. So we'll signpost people individually to what they want to do. In Stockport, for example, there's a indoor bowling group who meet on a weekly basis, and a number of people have gone doing that as a form of continuing to do some exercise once they've completed our programme. So it's a pilot programme, as I say. We've tried it in Salford, and we've also running it in Stockport, Rochdale and Oldham. The results so far have been very positive. I mentioned the evaluation, and hopefully when the evaluation report comes back, we'll be in a position to, in the future, try and source some additional funding to continue with the programme. We are gathering evidence in the form of case studies, and we are producing an internal evaluation of our own on what has gone well in Greater Manchester and what's gone not so well, because it is a pilot programme. It's not brilliant in all cases, and there are areas and lessons that we can obviously improve on. So that's the Moving Forward programme. Talk a little bit about the benefit of swimming and aquatic therapy. Now, we have to confess to not being aware locally of any swimming clubs that deliver swimming classes for stroke-specific patients. We know that there are disability swims. There's one, for example, at Romiley in Stockport. But the benefits of the swimming, and people in Swim England will know this, but it takes the stress off the joints, provides more resistance, so people can actually walk across the pool in the shallow end to get more strength and power in the legs. Quite often, people do not need mobility aids while in the pool. You have improved control, increased muscle strength, improved walking speed, decrease in the spasticity, that's that tightness I was talking to you all about a bit earlier, and improvements in weight-bearing abilities, movements, and knee flexor strength. What we know so far, I'll talk about some barriers that I've actually had in a couple of discussions with people shortly, that there is evidence of some lack of understanding of stroke and disability generally in terms of swimming. We know that Swim England are delivering this level 3 aquatic activity for health qualification. Although we don't know of any stroke-specific swim classes, we are here to be told that there are some, hopefully, but there are barriers, and I only know that there are barriers because a couple of people that have completed the Moving Forward programme were keen swimmers once upon a time prior to their stroke, and the barriers that they have fed back to me are as follows. Issues with travel to get to and from the pool or the venue. Lots of people following a stroke are not able to drive until they're given the all clear by the GP, and in some cases has to do a retest privately. There's an issue about safety. One gentleman in Rochdale complained that the walk from the changing room to the pool was fraught with danger, and although there was a rail, it was like walking on ice, he said. It was too dangerous for him. Appropriate swimwear and changing facilities. If someone has lost the use of one side of their body following the stroke, then there's an issue then about how to get changed and the feeling of self-consciousness that might bring if they're in a changing room with able-bodied swimmers. The stroke could have impacted on them cognitively, and they might get confused or feel unsafe in or around water. They feel intimidated and scared by other swimmers in the pool. There may be an issue with communication in trying to get their message across, both going into the actual leisure centre and paying for a swimming class or swimming session, and indeed talking with staff more generally. The access into the pool I've spoken about in terms of how that can be fraught with danger if somebody is not able-bodied, and the water, as ever, might be a touch on the cold side. So that's all we're going to talk about in terms of the exercise. What I set out to do when we did this element of the webinar was to talk about how a stroke can affect mobility, considerations when talking to stroke survivors about doing some exercise, why there are low levels of exercise in stroke survivors, what the preventions are, and what we're trying to do to support them. And I've spoken a little bit about what we know is available locally with swimming, but I've also spoken at some length about the Moving Forward After Stroke programme. So I hope that's been useful. Are there any questions?
Can I just jump in there, Eamon and Laura? Yeah. If you just flick back a slide for me, just to those challenges that people are facing, that's the barriers and considerations. Yeah. What I actually found really, really interesting is that basically all of those things come up on our behaviour change research that we've done.
Oh, right.
So it ties in really quite nicely. Obviously, it's specific to obviously people who've had a stroke, but there are very, very similar elements. So things around travel. So we know that many leisure centres and facilities don't have good travel routes, or they're not accessible by bus, for example. So it's looking at how we can obviously work with partners and pools to try and encourage their customers, for example, to come in maybe a different way, so through groups or by taxiing. We've got case studies of where it's worked really, really well for other maybe other groups of individuals. In terms of safety, that has come up loads in our behaviour change as well. So allowing people to be able to wear flip-flops on poolside, or knowing that people can wear pool shoes. It's just a communication piece. So actually educating our customers that it's okay to wear pool shoes on poolside. It's okay to take a towel. It's okay to take a walking stick. It's okay to take a crutch. As long as there's somewhere for them to put it, like obviously whilst they're in the pool. And as long as it's then easily accessible for them after they get out of the pool as well. So it might be worth actually, while we send around the presentation after today's webinar, maybe, I don't know, if everyone else would feel it'd be beneficial, then I could send the behaviour change stuff as well. Things like changing facilities and appropriate swimwear, again, it comes up. A lot of it comes down to people's perception of what they should be doing or where they should get changed, or things like lockers, and a lot of it is the barriers that people face, and actually those barriers aren't just specific to people who've had stroke. And I saw this slide and I was thinking, oh my gosh, they are so comparable, like for like, really. But again, it is just that communication piece to be able to break those barriers down. And I think if we can break them down across the board, then yeah, absolutely. Obviously, those individuals who you're talking about in terms of stroke patients, then absolutely they would benefit from that as well.
Okay.
So I will send that around. I know a couple of people have been, yes please, on private message, so that's absolutely fine. Steph has also sent a comment through privately saying that she's a retired nurse, just trained as a swimming teacher level 2. Yeah, Steph, we can send you specific details. In terms of specific details for stroke, I'm guessing that would be the level 3 qualification, but you would need to be a PT to do that, I believe. So I'll find out for you, Steph, and I'll let you know. If anybody has any specific information that they want, obviously contact Eamon and Laura. Are you guys okay for them to contact you direct?
Yes, please do, yes.
Sorry, can I just be heard? Hello.
Hello?
Hey, yeah, sorry. So, my name's Richard Watts. Just a quick question. So you're going on a lot about the classes that you do and the program that they get put onto with the qualified PTs. I think Bethan just touched on it slightly then.
Yeah.
But so for me, I use a hydrotherapy pool in Taunton. I also use a completely private pool, and the group lessons for stroke sufferers is something that would be really interesting to me. I'll keep banging on about accessibility. In regard to the activities and exercises that they're doing with PTs, is this something that would be transferable into the pool? I'm assuming those activities would then be easier. And if that was the case, would the level 2 be enough for you to be able to deliver that in the water? Or would you then have to go on to qualify within the PT section of things as well?
I'd have to find that out for you. That's a good question.
Yeah, Rich, from what I know, in terms of the level 3 qualification, it's very, very specific to obviously all different health conditions. And it's a very, very tough course to qualify through. So you need to have the full understanding of obviously the PT background, the biomechanics, the physiology, everything that comes with being a PT. But the aquatic level 3 course is like the next step. I don't know if there's anything in the pipeline to look at obviously level 2 teachers and whether there's kind of an interim sort of qualification that we can deliver. But yeah, the level 3 is a very high level qualification, I guess you could say, and it does have to come from the PT aspect at the moment.
Okay, super. Okay, cool. I was just wondering whether there's any way of us, without sounding stupid, dumbing it down, so we could then offer something that was specific for stroke victims, and I'm assuming that's the way to stroke, you guys at the Stroke Association are trying to move as well, so they do have more access, because I completely understand that if I'd had a stroke going along to a swimming pool that's public could be quite daunting, and for us at private swimming suppliers to be able to utilize completely private pools would be a huge move forward in that area.
Yeah, I think it would probably have to be more of a CPD aspect. So very, very similar to obviously when we launched like SwimFit, for example. Obviously it's not the same, but it could be that we work with the Stroke Association to develop something which is specific for stroke patients, I guess. I mean, I don't know, Eamon and Laura, if anything's in the pipeline in terms of between you and Penny in our health team. But I think, like these guys are saying, there's a huge demand for it, and there's a lot of pools out there which would be ideal to use, and a lot of pools in communities which maybe would be more accessible than some other pools which are part of pilots, for example. So yeah, potentially, I don't know, maybe in the future it would be an opportunity for us to collaborate and work together on something which would be well used, I guess.
We did speak to a colleague of ours who's based in London, and she has tried to organise a swimming specific stroke session in Fulham, but there is stroke survivors in that session, but it's also open more wider to people with other disabilities. But one of the key things that she mentioned to us was that the pool in Fulham that they use has got easy accessibility, so you can literally walk into it or take a wheelchair into it, whereas facilities like that are few and far between, I think.
It's Laura, but through the project I'm working on at the moment, the Active Lives After Stroke, swimming is something that's come up quite a lot from the stroke survivors about them wanting to try it. And I have been looking into it, but there are challenges, and I've not yet managed to find anywhere successfully. But I'm hoping that in the future we can, because people do want to do it. I think it's just finding a provider who we can work with to make it accessible and everything for stroke survivors. So yeah, I think it's something we would like to develop further and continue those relationships with people locally, definitely.
I mean, just on that, as a private swim school, it's definitely, if that's something you were doing in conjunction with Swim England, that would be amazing, because I mean, from your perspective, you then have instant access to the nation in regards to offering these sessions for people that have suffered from strokes. And you look at the SwimFit programs and how they successfully operate within leisure centres. Something like that would just be sensational.
It would. Yeah. Just a point as well. We refer to people who've had a stroke as stroke survivors. I made that mistake myself on more than one occasion, calling people victims, and they do take umbrage. I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor, so just bear that in mind when speaking to people who've had a stroke.
Thanks, Damon. I was very cautious of what I called them. I was like, is it a stroke patient? Is it a stroke survivor? Yeah, I didn't know. So yeah, thanks for clarifying on that one. I think that's a really, really key point.
Thank you, Jeff, for your message privately. No worries about having to rush off, but glad you found it useful. Any questions?
Are there any? I was just about to ask exactly the same, Laura.
Great minds.
Absolutely.
Sorry, are you able to hear me, guys, or not?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just wondering, as a swim teacher that works independently and with a local authority, what I'm trying to gauge from this session is there anything I can do in terms of, I teach adults on a one-to-one in groups, but if I'm not qualified to teach or support someone with stroke, I'm just struggling to understand what I can do in my role, really.
I don't think you need to be, is this like on a one-to-one basis, or with people in a disability class?
Well, we do it on a one-to-one and just in a generic adult class, so that adult might have a disability, they might not have a disability. It depends whether we can facilitate it at the centre. But I'm wondering whether, as an independent swimming teacher, whether I can start, because I teach quite a lot of older adults independently. Yeah. They want to get fitter, they find that water easier to move around in. I'm just wondering whether I need that specific training to offer out to people that are stroke survivors.
I think, I don't think, you know, there's kind of, you've got to have done any kind of qualification specifically. I think for us, the purpose of today was about ensuring that leisure providers were more aware of stroke. So kind of coming along to this, you're upskilling yourself. And so, you know, if you feel comfortable working with stroke survivors and know that you can provide that, the support to them, and, you know, that you would normally provide, and you can provide it safely and you're comfortable with that. I don't, you know, as far as I'm aware, you don't have to have done anything in particular, but I think it's about ensuring that you're aware of stroke and some of the effects, and that was one of our kind of main purposes of coming along today, to make people more stroke friendly, so to speak. And aware of stroke and the effects of stroke, and how you can accommodate how you deliver your sessions in different ways. So we got a message from someone before that said, are we right to think that we need to think about physical restraints as well as mental well-being and challenges when designing sessions? And absolutely, that's what we're trying to get across, how you can tailor your sessions, taking into consideration the various different effects of people's stroke. And no one stroke is the same, everyone's stroke is different. But if you've got an awareness of the different types of things and the barriers that could affect a stroke survivor, just having that understanding and the empathy with them, you know, so how you're coming across to them, that's really helpful. Does that kind of answer what your question was?
Yeah, I think so. I'm in the process of setting up my own school for children and adults. So I'm just trying to advance my knowledge as much as I can and find out what I can and can't potentially offer.
I think can
I just jump in on that one again? Sorry. In terms of what you can and can't offer, obviously, I think if you kind of go back to the messaging that we send within our adult Learn to Swim stuff, you get adults, it's like the same as children. Adults come in all shapes, different sizes, different abilities, disabilities, etc. And I think from today's webinar, obviously you guys can take the information with an understanding of what stroke actually is. I didn't have a clue that there was different forms of stroke. I just thought stroke was stroke, but I've never really come across it. So it's been very, very useful for me. But how you can apply that, I think, into a lesson setting, again, it's just what Laura said. It's having that understanding of their condition and actually what you can do to support them. And if you go to the messaging that's within our Adult Learn to Swim program, it's all about being adaptive and making sure that you can, offer different variations of practices or offer different hybrid strokes, for example. So if they're really, really struggling with their left side, for example, what can you do to support them in that lesson? What can you do to amend that stroke, which makes it actually suitable for them? We kind of need to come away from that whole front crawl, backstroke, breaststroke, butterfly thing, and allow them just to move in the water and to be happy and content in the water. And I think adult lessons really, really do need to have that focus. We can't just assume that everybody's the same, because they're not. And having the understanding from this, I think, will really, really benefit in a group setting.
Yeah.
I think also in that situation.
Does that help?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I was just going to add, if there was somebody that came to one of your classes who'd had a stroke, it's probably worthwhile asking if they can if they can give you the details of their physio.
Physio, yeah.
And then you can confer with he or she, and then they can advise accordingly on what they
I think that would be the approach I took. I wouldn't agree to proceed without sort of some reassurance from a medical professional on their side. Yeah.
Have you guys seen the what's it called? What do we call it? Like a PAR-Q form which we've got for adult swimming. We have.
I think so, because I'm an aqua fitness instructor.
Okay, so we have a template form which just allows you to have a conversation with that adult who's attending your lesson, and I think that'd be a really good starting point to obviously gain that information about from a health professional. But understand their fears and their frustrations, understand what they are able to do, understand what they struggle to do. Just to give you a really, really good understanding before they actually come onto poolside and into your lesson. Again, you're breaking down those barriers already beforehand. You can show them where the lockers are. You can walk them through to poolside before they even come to their first lesson. So a lot of those barriers which Eamon spoke about can already be broken down before that as well, just in that one kind of meet up over that PAR-Q. So I'll send that round, because I think you'll probably all benefit from that if you're looking at working with obviously adults as well.
Sorry, just something to add to that Ms. Gossage was just. I think that we've got to remember, and I've worked with a few people that have had stroke in the past, as well as my granddad's had a stroke, is that it is a normal human being underneath the numerous issues that come off of the back end of a stroke. And I'm guessing a big part of the barrier is them approaching somewhere and then somebody becoming a little bit, oh, well, let me just check this, let me just check that out. I guess as a supplier and as somebody who's taught people that are stroke survivors, is that you've just got to look at it as a normal adult one-to-one in many degrees, and then just adapt off of the back end of that. As long as you're risk assessing, as long as you're making sure that you're taking everything into account, you really can't go far wrong. And the benefits of you putting that time and effort in and being that one person out of the 10 they've probably spoken to turn around and say, do you know what, yeah, I'm going to accommodate you on this, won't just help them physically, but just like I mentioned, that message I sent earlier, we've got to take into account the mental well-being of stroke survivors as well. Their mental well-being, that will just help it no end. I might be completely wrong, Eamon, Laura, tell me if I am, but that's sort of the approach I'd come from.
No, that's bang on.
Yeah, I agree. You've got to be sensitive. You know, as a professional, I think you still need to protect yourself. I'd still want my own reassurances, but yeah, you've got to be sensitive about how you approach it with somebody.
I guess ultimately, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. If you're working at a leisure centre, for example, obviously it's very, or a health club, or you know, a public facility more so than obviously a private pool, you will not know if you have people walking through your door and going to a general swim session who have had a stroke in the past. You won't know that unless you obviously know your customers really, really well. So Richard, yes, I completely agree in terms of obviously if they come into your lesson, everything that you said, absolutely. But if people are coming into your facility, you can't put those provisions in place because you don't know. So yeah, absolutely, you need to treat them exactly the same as everybody else. But just be mindful that actually if somebody is struggling, the facilities that I've worked at, I've had really, really good relationships with my customers. So you get to know people on a personal basis. But just having those conversations can really, really help. But like I said, you can't risk assess absolutely everybody who walks through your door. But what you can do is actually break down those barriers through your marketing, through your communication, through your front of house. And from this, just being more aware of A, what it can look like, and B, what it actually is. And yeah, C, obviously what we can do to help.